Parents sided with my ex-husband after he framed me. 5 years later, they learned what he really did, but it was too late. The courtroom was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of papers and the tapping of a judge's gavel. I sat there, numb, staring at my ex-husband Nathan as he spun a web of lies that would forever alter my life. "She was unstable," he said with a sigh, his polished demeanor a sharp contrast to my disheveled, sleepless state. "I wanted to make it work, I really did, but she'd become erratic, dangerous even." I clenched my fists under the table, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the murmurs in the courtroom. "She drained our savings," Nathan continued, his voice steady and calm. "I had no choice but to file for divorce. She even stole from her own family when I cut her off financially." "Liar!" I wanted to scream, but my lawyer grabbed my wrist under the table, shaking his head. "Don't give him the satisfaction," his eyes seemed to say. But it was useless. The damage was done. My parents sat behind him, their expressions grim, but not for me. They were disappointed in me, their daughter, their blood. When the ruling came, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. I lost everything: the house, custody of my daughter, even the family I thought would stand by me. Nathan's lies had worked, and my parents, my own parents, had believed him. 5 years later, I was living a quiet, lonely life in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. I worked as a receptionist at a dental office during the day and took online classes at night. The custody arrangement allowed me to see my daughter, Lily, only on alternate weekends, but Nathan never made it easy. He'd cancel visits last minute, or forget, to tell me about changes in her schedule. He was as petty as he was vindictive. My parents? They barely spoke to me. Their disapproval lingered like a shadow, haunting every interaction. In their eyes, I was the failure, the ungrateful daughter who had ruined her marriage and brought shame to the family. It wasn't until a Saturday afternoon in late spring that everything changed. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, sorting through old photos of Lily, memories I clung to in the absence of new ones, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "We need to talk. Can we come over?" I stared at the screen, confused. My parents hadn't visited me since the divorce, and their texts were usually brief, obligatory responses to holidays or birthdays. "Sure," I replied hesitantly, my heart racing. An hour later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, my parents stood there, looking older than I remembered. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and my father's shoulders slumped in a way that seemed almost defeated. "Can we come in?" my father asked gruffly. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. They sat on my worn-out couch, their movements stiff and uncertain. I sat across from them, the tension thick enough to choke on. "What's going on?" I finally asked, unable to bear the silence. My mother took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. We've been talking to Lily," she said slowly. My stomach tightened. "Is she okay? Did something happen?" "She's fine," my father said quickly, but his voice was strained. "It's just, she told us some things about Nathan. Things we didn't know." I froze. "What kind of things?" My mother's lip quivered. "She said he yells at her, all the time, that he punishes her for small things, forgetting her homework, spilling a drink. She's scared of him, Amelia." The room spun. I clutched the armrest of the chair, my knuckles white. "I've been telling you for years he's not who you think he is," I said, my voice shaking. "And you didn't listen." "We didn't know," my father said, his voice cracking. "We didn't want to believe it." "Oh, you didn't want to believe it," I snapped, my anger boiling over. "You didn't want to believe your daughter, but you had no problem believing every word that snake told you in court. You sided with him. You let him take Lily from me." My mother broke into sobs, and my father put a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes glassy. "We made a mistake," he said quietly. "A terrible mistake." "Mistake?" I laughed bitterly. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. This question mark. This ruined my life. My mother looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. We want to make it right, Amelia. Please, tell us what we can do. I leaned back, crossing my arms. What's brought this on? Why now? Why? After 5 years? We found out something else, my father admitted, his voice heavy. Nathan's been arrested. I blinked. What? He was caught embezzling from his company, my mother said softly. It's all over the news. And they found evidence he forged financial documents during the divorce proceedings. He framed you, Amelia. He made it look like you drained the accounts, but it was him all along. I couldn't breathe. For 5 years, I'd carried the weight of their judgment, the shame of being branded a thief and an unfit mother, only to find out it was all a lie, a carefully constructed lie. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Do you have any idea how many nights I cried myself to sleep, knowing my own parents didn't believe me? We're sorry, my mother choked out. We're so sorry. I don't want your apologies, I said, standing up. I want my daughter back. I want my life back. Can you give me that? They didn't have an answer. Of course they didn't. What could they say? Sorry didn't fix 5 years of pain, of lost time with Lily, of the shattered trust between us. In the weeks that followed, Nathan's arrest made headlines. Details of his schemes came to light. How he'd siphoned money from our accounts, how he'd manipulated evidence to win the divorce, how he'd fooled everyone, including my parents. I filed for full custody of Lily, armed with the truth and the support of people who had once turned their backs on me. The court battle was grueling, but this time, I wasn't alone. When the ruling came in my favor, I cried for the first time in years, not out of sadness, but out of relief. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep in her room, my parents came over. They brought a bottle of wine and a bouquet of my favorite flowers, an olive branch of sorts. I opened the door and hesitated for a moment before letting them in. My mother smiled nervously, holding the bouquet out to me. We thought these might brighten up your table, she said, her voice unsure. I took the flowers, running my fingers over the soft petals. Thanks, I said quietly, stepping aside to let them in. My father followed her, clutching the wine bottle like a peace treaty. Nice place, he said, looking around. His voice was gruff, but there was a flicker of warmth in it. You've done well for yourself. I didn't respond right away, instead busying myself with finding a vase for the flowers. The silence stretched thin as they stood awkwardly in the middle of my small living room. Finally, I turned to face them. Why are you here? My voice was steady, but the edge in it was unmistakable. It's not like we've been doing family dinners. My mother exchanged a glance with my father before speaking. We've been thinking a lot, Amelia, she said, sitting down on the couch. About everything. About the mistakes we made. Mistakes, I repeated, crossing my arms. That's putting it lightly. I know, my father said, his voice unusually soft. He sat next to my mother and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. We failed you. We failed to see the truth, and for that, we're sorry. I stared at them, searching their faces for sincerity. My mother's eyes were glassy with unshed tears, and my father's usually stoic expression was tinged with regret. Still, the anger I'd carried for so long wasn't so easily extinguished. You didn't just fail me, I said, my voice rising. You took his side. You stood by while he dragged my name through the mud and took everything from me. You called me a liar, a thief. Do you even know what that felt like? My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. We believed him because he was so convincing. And we were scared, Amelia. Scared of what it all meant. Scared? I said, my tone incredulous. You were scared? I was the one losing my daughter, my home, my reputation. But you were scared. I know it sounds weak, my father said, his voice breaking slightly. And maybe it was, But we thought we were doing the right thing at the time. The right thing, I repeated bitterly, pacing the room. You thought siding with Nathan, the man who had everything to gain from framing me, was the right thing? My mother wiped at her eyes. We see now how wrong we were. Nathan, he fooled us. He fooled everyone. But that doesn't excuse what we did to you. No, it doesn't, I said sharply. And it doesn't change what I've lost because of it. My father nodded solemnly. You're right. Nothing we say can undo the past. But we want to try to make it up to you. If you'll let us. I sat down across from them, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my chest. Do you even know what you're asking for? You think one apology is going to fix this? No, my mother said quickly. We know it'll take time, and we're willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. We miss you, Amelia, and we miss Lily. At the mention of Lily, I felt a pang of vulnerability. She's been through so much already, I said, my voice softening. I won't let her get caught up in this. She's my priority now. And she should be, my father said firmly. You've been a good mother, Amelia, better than we gave you credit for. We want to be part of her life, and yours. I leaned back, studying them both. Their remorse seemed genuine, but the wounds they'd left weren't so easily healed. I don't know if I can just forgive you, I admitted. I don't even know if I want to. We understand, my mother said, her voice trembling. But we're not going to give up. We'll do whatever it takes, Amelia. Just let us try. The sincerity in her voice stirred something in me, a flicker of the connection we once had. But I couldn't let go of the pain so easily. It'll take more than flowers and wine, I said, gesturing to the table. Whatever it takes, my father repeated. We mean it. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, I nodded. We'll see, I said cautiously, but don't expect this to happen overnight. My mother smiled through her tears. Thank you, she whispered. That's all we ask. As they left that night, I stood by the door, watching them disappear into the night. The road to rebuilding our relationship would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt like there was a glimmer of hope. For me, for Lily, and maybe even for us.